I must say hello to all of my friends and supporters around the world. Today, I am bringing a live program about what the Prime Minister of Israel said to the world some time ago and what the world is doing in responding. The Prime Minister of Israel said it very, very clearly that Hamas must release all hostages and only then there will be a ceasefire. The Prime Minister, his words must carry weight because he meant what he said. It must not be taken lightly. Hamas must release the hostages. Palestinians around the world must understand and acknowledge that. Also, prime ministers and presidents throughout the world must adhere to the words of the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, the Prime Minister of France and other prime ministers and presidents of other countries failed when being pressured by one-sided or deceitful journalists when questions are being asked concerning the bombing and killing of innocent civilians, including children and babies. The leaders are very confused and being lost when questions are being asked by some clever journalists. The leaders are supposed to be very strong and straightforward, also prompt, and to stand up and tell the world that they abide what the Prime Minister of Israel said, that Hamas must release all the hostages and only then there will be a ceasefire. When we had, or we are still having protesters, Palestinian protesters all around the world, all these leaders, especially the United Nations, they're all supposed to have a togetherness, not to demand a ceasefire, but to demand Hamas and its militants to release all the hostages. Demand it. Let them know so there can be a ceasefire. The hostages must be released. Now, Palestinians around the world and the Arab countries around Israel are pressuring the US government and other European governments to put pressure on Israel to have a ceasefire. What about putting pressure on Hamas to release all the hostages? Why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they demanding Hamas and its militants to release all the hostages? Why only a ceasefire? Why can't leaders of the developing world speak to the Palestinians protesters around the world to protest against Hamas for the release of all the hostages? Why can't they do it? Are these leaders, are they sleeping? Are they daydreaming? Have they gone on vacations? It is time for them to open their eyes. It is time for them not to be one-sided and only demanding ceasefire and ceasefire. Why aren't they demanding Hamas and its militants to release all the hostages? Why only a ceasefire? All the time ceasefire. Hamas and their leaders have already caused too much of destruction and pain upon Gaza, upon their people. Innocent lives of civilians, children, and babies are caught in crossfiring because Hamas and its militants are using them as human shields. The United Nations and also world leaders must understand that Hamas and its militants are taking innocent civilians as human shields. They are using them for their own protection. They don't care about human lives. That's the reason why there are so many deaths in Gaza. Civilians become the victims in crossfiring. And while that is happening, Hamas is bringing them out and focus the cameras on them so the world will blame Israel for the bombing. It's not Israel's fault to have all these casualties. It's the fault of Hamas. It's the fault of Palestinian Protestants around the world. It is the fault of world leaders. It's the fault of the United Nations from the very beginning not to condemn Hamas and its militants what they have done, and also to demand Hamas and its militants to release all the hostages. They should have done that at the beginning. If they would have done it, there would not have been so much of destruction and so many loss of innocent lives. They failed. United Nations fails. World leaders fails. All these protesters around the world failed. All of them were one-sided. One-sided. That is why the war is so huge today. It could have been stopped by United Nations and world leaders and all Palestinian protesters around the world failed. Now, I do hope that the United Nations and also France have a clear understanding on international laws concerning bombing of hospitals, churches, schools, mosques, etc. I do think they ought to do a thorough revision in international laws because they failed to understand the bombing that is taking place in Gaza. They failed. Most of them are saying it's a genocide. Israel is a democratic state, is a democratic country. They abide with international laws. They know the consequences if they breach international laws. Since the beginning of this war, they are fighting within international laws. They are not like the rest of the countries around them. They are not like Hamas that don't care. They do care. They do care about all Gazans, the civilians, children, babies. Israel do care. They are going after Hamas. Hamas is hiding among civilians, between civilians, among children, between children, among babies, between babies, as human shields. In hospitals they are hiding. In tunnels they are hiding. In mosques they are hiding. In churches, schools. They're all hiding. Now, if the terrorists are using these premises as a base to launch attacks or to store weapons, missiles, bombs, guns, etc., Israel has the right to defend itself. They have the right to bomb those places, provided they give warning with a time limit. They have the right to do so. Now, France's Prime Minister said there is no justification for Israel to attack civilians and children and bombing of babies. That's a very silly statement of the Prime Minister of France. He should have known better, but I think, my opinion, that he was confused at the time and do not know how to answer the journalists. Israel is not attacking civilians and bombing of babies. They abide within international laws. Now, let's get this straight. Israel is abiding with international laws from day one of this war. Israel is not bombing innocent civilians deliberately or intentionally. I want the Prime Minister of France to acknowledge and to digest that. Hamas is holding civilians as human shields, and they are caught in crossfiring and become victims in this war. When children are being killed in the bombs, Hamas is bringing them out and focus the cameras for the world to see. Then the world is blaming Israel. Israel is not to be blamed, as I mentioned before. The Palestinian Hamas and its militants, they're supposed to be blamed. The United Nations and all these protesters around the world and world leaders, they're supposed to be blamed. From the very beginning, if the United Nations would have condemned Hamas and its militants for the action, what they have done, and asked them, demanded that they should release all the hostages, also all these protesters around the world would have come together and they asked for them to release of all the hostages, we would not have had so much of destruction and so many loss of innocent lives. Again, I will say it's the fault of the United Nations world leaders and all the protesters that are still protesting around the world to have a ceasefire, and they are not demanding Hamas and its militants to release all their hostages. Hamas and its militants are also using ambulances to transport or to move their weapons around. What do you expect the Israeli army to do when in confrontation with Hamas in use of ambulances? To just stand there and watch and being attacked and killed? Don't they have the right to defend themselves at all times? They have the right to defend themselves and to defend Israel. Now, please look at the video and you will see for yourself that Hamas and its militants are indeed using hospitals for launching and storage of weapons for the attacks on Israel. This video has proven that Hamas and its militants are indeed hiding in hospitals with weapons and also under hospitals in tunnels. There have been lots of evidence in this video that the world can see quite vividly. There are also many false, cunning, subtle journalists who give fake and false information and not telling the truth, and they are blaming Israel for the destruction of Gaza and the killing of innocent civilians. Journalists are supposed to report the truth of what they have seen, what they have heard, for the public to know the truth. They cannot be one-sided or to fabricate stories. They always have to tell the truth so the world can be informed. The world will see in this video also that Israel is not bombing hospitals, mosques, etc. without a cause that is always justified. They are not breaching international laws. They uphold all international laws from since day one of this war. Now you will listen to what the Prime Minister of France said about Israel. Also, one of the Hamas leaders, he is doubting, lying, that Hamas and its militants are nowhere under hospitals and tunnels. But in this video you will see they are also in mosques, and everything is being exposed, what they have been doing, and cause this Gaza war for it to be so big, and it's widening more and more.
Palace that there was no justification for the bombing, saying that a ceasefire would benefit Israel. While recognising Israel's right to protect itself, he said, "We do urge them to stop this bombing in Gaza." He's been speaking to the BBC's Europe editor, Katie Adler.
We've had weeks of aid organisations sounding the alarm about Gaza, and so you've now said that humanitarian pauses in fighting aren't enough, and there needs to be work towards a ceasefire. Are you disappointed that other world leaders aren't joining you in that call, like the US or the UK?
No, I hope they will. And let's be clear, I mean, I was one of the first leaders to call Prime Minister and President of Israel after the terrorist attack, the 7th of October. We clearly condemned this terrorist attack and this terrorist group and recognize the right of Israel to protect itself and react. But day one, we say that this reaction and the fight against terrorism, because it is led by a democracy, should be compliant with international rules, rule of war, and humanitarian international law. And day after day, what we saw is a permanent bombing of civilians in Gaza. And I think it's very important to say the whole story. But I think this is the only solution we have. This is fire. Because it's impossible to explain we want to fight against terrorism by killing innocent people.
You've talked about the fight against terrorism needing to be merciless, is the word you used, but not without rules. And you've just referred there to the high loss of civilian life in Gaza. Do you think Israel is respecting those rules, the international rules that you're referring to?
Look, in the very first days, it's clear that the emotion, the compassion, created a situation where everybody was just close to Israel and backing them and sharing the pain. And we do share their pain, and we do share the willingness to get rid of terrorism. We know what terrorism means in France. But I think there is no justification precisely to attack civilians.
What I would like to just to clarify with you, are you saying that Israel is guilty of breaking international humanitarian law, potential war crimes?
No, I'm here. Look, I think it's not the proper way to approach the question. We do recognize the right to protect themselves. And 1 month after this terrorist attack, I think it would be not the right way to deal with a partner, a friend, just to say you will be condemned and you are guilty. De facto, today, civilians are bombed. De facto, these babies, these ladies, these old people are bombed and killed. There is no reason for that and no legitimacy. So we do urge Israel to stop. I'm not here to, I'm not a judge. I'm a head of state. I just remind everybody international law. I call for a ceasefire, and I will urge them for a ceasefire, for an humanitarian ceasefire.
Wesley Clark. General, I want to start with Al-Shifa. We were just hearing about that right there. Let me just read you this latest CNN report as you look at that on the map. A U.S. official with knowledge of the American intelligence says Hamas as a command node under that hospital and uses fuel intended for the hospital and its fighters, and the fighters regularly cluster around that hospital. So that information from a U.S. official, as we're getting new video from the IDF of the Al-Quds hospital. That's a hospital nearby. It's no longer operational, but there are still people inside waiting to be evacuated. And you can see in this footage from the IDF what they have circled and identified as a terrorist with an RPG launcher at the front door of the hospital, going in and out of the hospital. So, General, if you will, just talk about this. Talk about how Hamas uses these structures and how that complicates Israeli efforts in the region.
Well, this is a long-developed plan by Hamas to use international laws of land warfare against the Israelis to be able to bring global pressure against the Israelis when they retaliated. So the tunnel network has been built according to all the information that's been made public so that its centered node is under these hospitals. This is where the nexus of the tunnel network is. And Hamas did this deliberately. Now, from the Israeli perspective, they are under international law, so they have to protect humanitarian facilities. They cannot bomb hospitals. They have not bombed this hospital, but they do have the right to self-defense. And they are going to have to go into these hospitals and get into those command nodes. Maybe the command nodes will have been evacuated by then. But there is a fight for this, and there is a concern about this by the Israelis to try to avoid the global implications of what they're doing. But they're still bound by the laws of land warfare. So you have one side that's legally trying to deal with an enemy. You have the other side which is cynically exploiting international law to put its own people at risk and use them as hostages. That's what this is really about, John.
Yeah.
It was not just a hospital. Israeli, U.S. intelligence, and reporters who've been called to meetings by Hamas officials in the hospital say it is a Hamas headquarters.
Hamas has turned hospitals into command and control centers.
Last month, top Israeli military spokesman Admiral Daniel Hagari showed what he called an illustration of Hamas's tunnels under Shifa Hospital.
Hamas uses Shifa Hospital as a shield for Hamas terror infrastructure. Hamas wages war from hospitals.
That's an allegation that Hamas quickly denied.
The Israelis have failed to provide a single piece of evidence to prove that this facility has tunnels underneath or sent any command center underneath.
And no matter what's underneath, international humanitarian law protects the hospital's doctors and patients, says Boucher Saunier.
The hospital cannot lose this protection if some patients and doctors remains inside. Mean that the parties to the conflict are not relieved of their duty to take all precaution to ensure that the military advantage they will obtain through pursuing their attack will not affect the patient, the doctors, and the civilian in a way that is disproportionate with the military advantage.
We're now entering into the area of the hospital where we had found the evidence.
But Israel argues the military advantage is vital, and Hamas hides its military assets in multiple hospitals. Today, Hagari visited the Rantisi hospital and showed what he called evidence of Hamas fighters, motorcycles they used on October the 7th and where they kept hostages.
A woman, clothes, and a rope. A rope next to the legs. And look above this. Look above it. It's a baby bottle.
Well, hospitals have a special protected status under international humanitarian law, but they can lose the status when they are actually used by the enemy forces. You still need to give an advance warning, telling the enemy to stop the military use before attacking a hospital. But if the enemy continues to do so, then a hospital can also become a lawful military target.
A video claiming to show a tunnel used by Hamas underneath the main Al-Shifa medical complex, the hospital. The video claims to show a shaft on the grounds of the complex, which goes 10 meters underground. After a cut, the video shows a tunnel, which the IDF says is 55 meters long and used by... Israel has repeatedly claimed Hamas is using the hospital as a command center to justify attacks on or near the complex. Hamas has always denied the allegations and invited international agencies to investigate the facility.
They've yet to comment on that video, though, released by the IDF. As soon as they do, we'll let you know. Well, Sky's Alistair Bunkle has more from Jerusalem.
Just a reminder, hospitals are protected under international law of warfare unless they are being used for military purposes, and then they can become a military target. And that is what the Israelis say is the reason for their operation in and around the Shifa hospital in central Gaza city. And they have now released some proof. The first proof, they say, is tunnels that were dug underneath the hospital by Hamas. So you can see this video here that they briefed journalists here in Israel on tonight, and they discovered the tunnel by blowing up a vehicle that they said was used by Hamas, and they found this tunnel shaft complete with a ladder that goes 10 meters underground. When you get to the bottom of it, it then runs for 55 meters in the direction of Al-Shifa hospital and ends at a blast-proof door with a small firing hole in it. So the Israelis have told the world many times over the last couple of weeks they believe Al-Shifa hospital has a network of tunnels underneath it that were being used by Hamas as a command and control center and possibly as an area to hold hostages. Up until now, we hadn't seen any proof of those tunnels, but the Israelis have now shown us this video. They say that there is a much more extensive network of tunnels to discover and to uncover still, and that is why their operations in and around the hospital will take much more time to come. In terms of whether they found any evidence of Hamas presence there, or whether they found any evidence that hostages were held there, we don't know yet. But this is significant because it is the first time, as I say, that part of a tunnel network underneath Al-Shifa hospital has been shown to the wider world, and the Israelis say this is what justifies their operation in and around Gaza's largest hospital.
Well, it's been a busy night out in the Middle East because Israel has released a video claiming to show a tunnel used by Hamas underneath Gaza's main Al-Shifa hospital. The video appears to show a shaft on the grounds of the complex which goes 10 meters underground. So for more on this, joining us live now is the Israeli Defense Force spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Amnon Scheffler. Amnon, appreciate your time this morning. So while we keep this picture running, what conclusions have you drawn about the video of this tunnel near Al-Shifa?
Good morning, Peter, and thanks for having us. Very, very clear conclusions is what we see here. This is clearly an operational shaft that goes down 10 meters into the ground and then 50 meters going underneath the hospital, the Shifa hospital. Now, this is what terror infrastructure is. This is how it looks like. On top of that, I remind all the viewers that we have seen communication skills, we have seen intel, we have seen arms that are spread all around the hospital, and this is what Hamas headquarters is using the most sensitive locations of humanity, hospitals, as its human shield. So this is the clear evidence that we've been talking about, and here we see it on live TV.
Okay, so this justifies the evacuation of the hospital in your view. This justifies attacks at or near the hospital.
Nobody wants to see the patients, the medical staff leave any hospital, but Hamas, that deliberately uses these hospitals and schools and mosques as its headquarters and as its place to carry out terrorist activity. Now, on top of that, we did not ask the hospital to be evacuated. We helped and mitigated any way in order to facilitate it what the director and the medical staff wanted and thought that was best for the patients. That is why we've been bringing in medicine, we've been bringing in food, we're bringing in water, we brought in fuel, we designated a corridor that they can leave if they wanted, and we protected that corridor because that is what we believe that needs to be done in the best way. We have also continuously been asking people to leave that area because we believe that this is a difficult and dangerous war zone, and we're doing everything we can in order to protect civilians, while Hamas is again and again, we must remind everyone about this, is using these civilians as its human shield.
Okay, so just so I know, because I've been there a couple of times, so the entrance to that shaft, is that actually inside the hospital complex or is it on its edges, outside?
It's inside the center of the complex, right underneath the Qatari part of the hospital, and that shaft again goes 10 meters down and then 50 meters underneath the other parts of the hospital. So I'll remind you.
Yeah. So the tunnels actually go. What are we not seeing here? So the tunnels actually run directly underneath the hospital with shafts leading into the hospital.
So what we're not seeing in your video, and we've released this, and it would be great if you can show it. You go 10 meters underneath the ground, and then 50 meters under the ground in a very, very clear cemented terra tunnel, and you reach a door. Now, this is a door that Hamas puts inside the tunnels in order to differentiate between different parts, because they know that potentially we can reach it, and that is how they want to differentiate between different areas. If it's a war room, if it's a part of an operational tunnel, if it's a shaft. So that's what we're seeing here in the tunnel.
I see that there, yes. No, I see that there. But is there evidence of Hamas presence or even hostages in those tunnels at that hospital?
So we've seen both, sadly. We've seen both terrorists with arms, AK-47s, coming in to the hospital from its main entrance door and dragging with them hostages. Now we know now that, sadly, Noa Marziano, an Israeli young woman that was murdered by Hamas inside the hospital, by Hamas again. So we know that. We know also that two other foreign nationalities that were dragged in on October 7th morning by Hamas from the Gaza envelope into the hospital. We've seen videos, and we released them also, of how they're seen taken in by Hamas with AK-47s from the main door and held inside the hospital for a while.
Okay. Amnon, just quickly, we saw that glass door there, I think, that you referred to, with what you're claiming is a firing hole. Have you gone beyond that yet, or is it too dangerous?
We have not yet. That is exactly what Hamas uses. Like we had also on the top of that shaft, was a vehicle similar to the ones that Hamas used on the horrific massacres of the October 7th, that was actually booby-trapped. And that is, again, showing the sickening behavior of Hamas, booby-trapping a car in the middle of a medical compound, not taking in mind, of course, that they will kill Israeli soldiers, but also with that, any patients and medical staff. That is how Hamas sadly operates, and that's what we're seeing in the middle of this hospital. That's what we've also seen in Rantisi Hospital and in Quds Hospital, and we know that we'll see in also other hospitals.
And on that, Scheffler, thanks for your time.
Now, in this video, you will also notice that medical staffs are indulging with Hamas and its militants. All medical staffs are aware that Hamas and its militants are indeed operating with weapons in hospitals and also underneath the hospitals in tunnels. There is no doubt about that. So the world will see it in this video.
I would like to share an update on our hostage rescue effort. The sensitive information that I will be revealing now was shared with the Marziano family this morning. 19-year-old IDF Corporal Noa Marziano was taken hostage by Hamas terrorists during the massacre of October 7th. Noa was taken into Gaza alive. She was held hostage by Hamas in Gaza City next to the Shifa hospital. During ongoing combat in the vicinity of where she was held captive, Noa Hamas captor was killed and Noa was injured. I repeat, she was only injured. An independent pathological report has determined Noa's injuries were not life-threatening. I repeat, Noa's injuries were not life-threatening. What happened to Noa? the world should ask what happened to Noah. According to the intelligence we have in our hand, a concrete intelligence, Hamas terrorists took Noah into Shifa Hospital, where she was murdered quickly. Hamas murdered Noah inside Shifa Hospital. Our thoughts are with Noah's family. We send our heartfelt condolences to the family. We did not reach Noah in time. This is only make the IDF more determined to do everything in our power to bring all our hostages home. We've also gathered more intelligence from the hospital, proving that Noah Marziano was not the only hostage taken by Hamas into Shifa Hospital. I will now share concrete evidence of hostages. One from Nepal, one from Thailand, taken from Israel during the Hamas massacre on October 7th. After ruthlessly massacring and taking people hostage, the terrorists fled to Shifa Hospital. They went to the hospital to hide. Here you can see Hamas terrorists drove back from the massacre. This is an Israeli military jeep they brought into the hospital. I want to repeat it just to make everybody understand. They're bringing an Israeli jeep, a military jeep, into the hospital compound, a place terrorists should not enter. They're entering with a military jeep. This is 1050, one of the Toyotas that used Hamas in the 7th of October are bringing hostages into the hospital. We have found this Toyota, a different one, with all the gear, a Nukhbe Toyota hidden in a garage inside the hospital. She was ready to go to the 7th of October massacre, like other Toyotas going back into the hospital, using the hospital as a terror base. Another jeep, another Israeli vehicle, military vehicle, entering into the Shifa Hospital, using the Shifa Hospital as a human shield shelter to Hamas terrorists, bringing military equipment to the vicinity of the hospital. Click. This is 7th of October, 10:55 a.m. The evidence I will share was sent by Israel to diplomatic channels to the countries of those civilians. Here you can see Hamas taking a hostage inside the vicinity. He doesn't look he even doesn't look need a treatment, but they're taking it inside the hospital. I will now share this video that shows the same hostage entering into the hospital with a gunman, terrorist inside the hospital. This is the main entrance of the hospital. Click. This is at 10:55 a.m. They're entering another hostage. Gunmen are entering another hostage from those countries I mentioned into the vicinity. The terrorists are guarding the room. We have not yet located both of these hostages and rescued them. We have not. yet located them. We do not know where they are. There are still hostages we need to rescue. The Israel Defense Forces, the world must remember, Hamas is holding the elderly, men, women, children, babies, hostage. The Israel Defense Forces has a moral obligation to bring every one of our hostages home. We will not rest until we do. Hamas was hiding and murdering our hostages in Shifa Hospital. Hamas was building terror tunnels underneath Shifa Hospital. By now, the truth is clear. Hamas wages war from hospitals, wages terror from hospitals. Everyone who cares about the future of humanity must condemn Hamas. Thank you.
Now, you have seen for yourself that Hamas and its militants are indeed operating with weapons in hospitals and also in tunnels under hospitals. If you agree to what I have said in this video and you appreciate my channel, then please press the subscribe button. Thank you.